The deed in the drawer. The eviction notice was still warm from the printer when my son pressed it into my hands and said, "You're homeless now, old man. Pack your things and get out of my house." My name is Daniel Whitfield. I am 64 years old, and in that moment, standing in the kitchen where I had taught this boy to ride a bike from the window, I felt something in my chest crack clean in half, not from fear, from disbelief. Because Marcus, my son, my only child, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through 3 states of the country looking for work, was standing there in a suit I'd paid for, holding papers he thought would end me. He had no idea what he was holding a match to. "Sit down, Marcus," I said quietly. "I don't need to sit down, Dad. I need you to read that. Judge already signed off. You've got 30 days. He said it the way you tell a stranger to move their car. Flat, rehearsed. I could hear his wife Priya's fingerprints all over the wording. She'd been a paralegal for 6 years and never let anyone forget it. I looked down at the paper, county court seal, case number, my name listed as respondent, and beneath it, the address of the house I had built with my own hands starting in 1994, back when Marcus was 4 years old and slept in a crib in the corner of what was, at the time, just a framed-out room with no drywall. "You filed this against me," I said, not a question. "I filed this against a tenant who's overstayed his welcome," Marcus said. "This house has been in my name since Mom passed. You know that." I did know that. That was the whole problem. He only knew half of it, and he'd built an entire eviction filing on the half he understood. Let me back up, because you need to understand exactly what kind of fire this boy was about to walk into. My wife Carol died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 11 months. In her final year, when the pain medication made her mind foggy and generous in equal measure, Carol had gotten it into her head that she wanted to leave something for Marcus before she went. She didn't want to wait for a will to be read at some sterile lawyer's office after she was already ash in an urn. She wanted him to feel like he had something now, while she could still see his face when he got it. So we transferred the house into a living trust, the Whitfield Family Trust, and named Marcus as trustee. On paper, if you did a quick title search, which is exactly what Marcus and Priya had clearly done, it would look like Marcus held legal control of the property. Trustee. His name right there on the county record, big as day. What Marcus never bothered to read, what Priya, for all her paralegal confidence, never bothered to check either, was the trust document itself, not the title record. The actual trust instrument, sitting in a fireproof lockbox in my home office, the one with the actual terms of who controlled what and when. Because being named trustee doesn't mean you own the asset. It means you have a legal duty to manage it according to the terms of the trust, and the terms of our trust were very, very specific. Carol and I, as co-grantors, retained a life estate and beneficial interest in the property for as long as either of us was alive. Marcus held bare legal title as trustee, yes, but he held it in trust for me. He couldn't sell it, he couldn't mortgage it. And he sure as hell couldn't evict the person the trust was designed to protect. He'd looked at a deed and seen his name and thought he'd hit the lottery. He had actually just handed me the receipt for his own arrogance. "Marcus," I said, setting the papers down on the counter, "did you read the trust agreement before you filed this?" "I read the deed," he snapped. "Your name's not on it. Mine is. That's how property law works, Dad. I don't need a lecture." "You need a lecture badly," I said, "but that's not the one I'm going to give you today." I walked past him into my office, the small room off the garage that used to be Carol's sewing room before it became my retreat after she passed, and I opened the lockbox. My hands went shaking, which surprised me a little, given how hard my heart was going. I pulled out the trust document, 41 pages, notarized, witnessed by 2 people who were very much alive and reachable by phone, and I carried it back into the kitchen and set it in front of him next to his eviction, filing like 2 pieces of a puzzle he'd assembled backward. "Page 14, I said, "Article 6, read it out loud." He didn't want to. I could see it in his face, that particular look people get when the ground under their righteous anger starts shifting before they've even started walking on it. Priya, who had been standing in the doorway, the whole time filming this on her phone for what I can only assume was meant to be some kind of victory reel, lowered the phone slowly. Marcus read it, his voice got quieter with every sentence. "The grantors, Daniel R. Whitfield and Carol A. Whitfield, retain an irrevocable life estate in the property described in Schedule A for the duration of either grantor's natural life. The trustee shall have no authority to convey, encumber, lease, or otherwise interfere with either grantor's exclusive right to occupy said property." He stopped reading. "This isn't right," he said. "Mom wouldn't have." Your mother drafted half of this herself, sitting in that hospital bed, because she was terrified you'd try to sell this house the second she was in the ground and blow the money on something stupid. She loved you, Marcus. She trusted you as much as she was able to at the end. But she wasn't a fool, and neither am I. You are not the owner of this house. You are the custodian of it on my behalf until the day I die. And on that day, not before, it becomes yours outright, if you haven't done something to disqualify yourself as trustee first. I let that last part hang there. Disqualify myself how, he said, and for the first time in the conversation, I heard something other than entitlement in his voice. I heard the beginning of fear. Article 9, I said. You should read that one too. Breach of fiduciary duty. Filing a fraudulent eviction against the beneficiary of a trust you're managing is about as clean an example of breach as a family law attorney could ask for. It's grounds for immediate removal as trustee. And once you're removed, guess who the court appoints as successor trustee, since your mother named a backup? He already knew. I could see it land on his face like a physical blow. You, he whispered. Me, I said, which means not only would you not get this house today, you'd lose your legal claim to ever get it at all. I could sell it, will it to a stranger, donate it to a cat shelter. Legally, once you're out as trustee for cause, your future interest in this property becomes complicated. A judge would have a lot of discretion. And judges tend not to look kindly on people who try to throw their 64-year-old widowed father out on the street with a filed court document. Priya finally spoke. This is insane. There's no way a document like that holds up. We're getting our own lawyer. You're welcome to, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't scared, because I had done nothing wrong and had every piece of paper to prove it. But before you spend money, you don't have on a lawyer to fight a trust that Carol and I built with an estate attorney who's been doing this for 30 years. Ask yourself something. Why did you file an eviction against your own father the same month you two started exploring options? As Priya put it to her sister on a phone call I happened to overhear in this very kitchen 3 weeks ago, for a bigger house near her mother in Ridgefield. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard in my life. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't, I felt sick. I felt like I was watching my son's face rearrange itself into something I didn't recognize, and underneath the vindication, there was a father's grief, sharp and old and familiar, because it was the same grief I'd felt at Carol's funeral, except this time the person I was losing was still standing right in front of me, breathing, blinking, and I couldn't do anything to stop what was happening to him from the inside. You were eavesdropping on us, Marcus said, grasping for the smallest, most irrelevant thread of the conversation, the way people do when the real thread is too painful to hold. I live here, Marcus. This is my house. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was standing in my own kitchen, making my own coffee, while you two planned my displacement in whispers you thought I couldn't hear through drywall I hung myself. He sat down then. Finally, the chair scraped against the tile, a sound I remembered from 1,000 family dinners, birthdays, homework arguments, the night I taught him long division at that same table until 11 o'clock because he refused to give up on a problem he could not solve. Dad, he said, and his voice cracked in a way that took me straight back to when he was 7 and had broken his arm falling off the porch railing. I didn't mean. You did mean it, I said, and I wasn't cruel about it, just honest, because he deserved honesty more than he deserved comfort in that moment. You meant every word. You stood in this kitchen and told your father he was homeless. You had that filed with a judge. You had a printer warm up a document meant to put me out on the street at 64 years old, 4 years after I buried the only woman I ever loved, in the house where I raised you, because you and your wife wanted a bigger place near her mother and decided the fastest way to fund the down payment was to liquidate an asset you thought was yours to sell. We were going to let you stay with us, Priya said weakly, which might be the single most insulting thing anyone said to me that whole year, because it revealed the plan in full, sell the house out from under me, then offer me a guest room in whatever new place they bought with my equity, dependent on their goodwill for the rest of my life. You were going to let me stay with you, I repeated, in a house bought with money from selling my house, where I'd sleep on borrowed time in a guest room, grateful, quiet, agreeable until I became inconvenient. Is that the plan? Because I've met men who ended up exactly there. I visited one at a facility 2 years ago that your mother's old bridge partner's husband ended up in, after his own son did something similar. It's not a good way to spend your last 20 years, being grateful for space in someone else's house that used to be yours. Marcus put his head in his hands. I watched his shoulders start to shake, and for a moment I almost went to him. Almost. 4 decades of fatherhood does not switch off because of one terrible afternoon, no matter how justified the anger underneath it is. But I didn't move, Because there is a difference between comforting someone and rescuing them from the consequences they built for themselves. And I had spent 64 years as a father learning, too late, in some cases, that those are not the same thing. Here's what happens now, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. You're going to call your attorney tomorrow morning and withdraw this filing. Not because I'm forcing you, though I could, and I'd win, but because you're going to realize on your own, once the shock wears off, that this was never going to work, and dragging it through court will only cost you money you clearly need and a relationship you're already close to losing for good. And then what? He said, not lifting his head. You just let us walk away. No, I said. Then you and Priya are going to find your own house, on your own terms, with your own money, the way every generation before you had to. And you're going to do it without touching a single brick of this house, because as of this conversation, I am amending the trust. You are no longer named as successor beneficiary. His head came up fast. Dad, I'm not disowning you, Marcus. I want to be very clear about that because I know how that sentence sounds. I'm not cutting you off from me. I'm cutting you off from an inheritance you tried to seize by force before I was even dead. There's a difference, and it's a difference you're going to have to sit with for a long time, because I don't know yet if I'll ever reverse it. That depends entirely on what the next few years look like. Whether you show me you understand what you did today, or whether you spend the next 10 years resenting me for a consequence you built with your own hands. I picked the eviction papers up off the counter, folded them once, and set them down in front of him, next to the trust document. You should keep this, I said. Frame it, maybe, somewhere you'll see it, not as a threat, as a reminder. Every man reaches a fork in the road at some point where he has to decide what kind of son, what kind of husband, what kind of father he's going to be. You reached yours today, 20 years earlier than most people do, and you took the wrong turn in front of a witness who happened to have the paperwork to survive it. Not everyone gets that lucky. Most people who get blindsided by someone they love don't have a trust document in a lockbox to save them. They just end up homeless, for real, because their kid was right about the deed. I walked to the door of my office and paused there, looking back at the two of them, my son, folded over the kitchen table where I'd taught him to tie his shoes, and his wife, standing frozen in the doorway with her phone finally, mercifully, dark and silent in her hand. I loved your mother for 31 years, I said. The last thing she did with a clear mind before the medication took the rest of her away from us was protect this house, and me, from exactly the kind of afternoon we just had. I don't know if you'll ever understand how much foresight that took. How much it must have hurt her to imagine you doing something like this, and to plan for it anyway, quietly, without ever telling either of us she'd done it, because she didn't want to accuse you of something before you'd done it. She knew, Marcus said, very quietly. She knew I might. She hoped she was wrong, I said. She built the trust anyway. That's the difference between hopping for the best in someone and being naive about them. Your mother never made that mistake. I'm trying not to either. I went into my office and shut the door, not hard, not a slam, just a firm, final click, and I sat down in the chair by the window where Carol used to do her sewing, and I let myself shake for exactly as long as I needed to. Outside, I heard the front door open and close twice. Priya first, then, a long while later, Marcus. I heard his car start in the driveway, idle for almost a full minute before he finally pulled away, like some part of him was hoping I'd come out and stop him, tell him it was all forgotten, that fathers and sons don't really keep score. But we do keep score, not out of cruelty. Out of self-preservation, sometimes, and sometimes out of love so old and so tired it has to protect itself the only way it knows how. The eviction papers are still sitting on my kitchen counter as I write this, weeks later. I haven't framed them. I don't think I will, but I haven't thrown them away either. Some days I think that's the most honest metaphor for where Marcus and I stand right now, not thrown away, not yet forgiven, just sitting on the counter between us, waiting to see which one of us picks it up first, and what we decide to do with it when we do. The house is still mine, it always was, but the son who tried to take it from me is the only thing I actually lost that day, and no trust document in the world can protect a man from that kind of eviction.